Welcome everyone to Buck on the occasion of Proposition 7, Evidentiary Methods. My name is Wietske Maas and I'm curator of discourse and publications here at Buck. This public program runs alongside, or should I say from within the space and duration of this exhibition in which we find ourselves in the midst of. This exhibition forms a temporary constellation of several recent investigations by the London-based architecture research agency, Forensic Architecture. And hopefully many of you will have had the chance to see the works in this exhibition or will have the chance to do so in the foreseeable time. The exhibition and its corresponding public program are part of Buck's overarching focus, Propositions for Non-Fascist Living. Many of you will know that this is a series we started in autumn last year as a long-term conjuncture of exhibitionary, discursive publication and learning programs with the aim to imagine and enact with and through art the very possibility of living non-fascist lives. This in times when we see a dramatic reconstitution of fascism in areas that configure our everyday life, social relations, politics, media, and culture. Forensic justice came out of conversations that the Buck team had with Forensic Architecture, and from the outset it was clear that the purpose of an exhibition is not to be an end in itself, but rather a forum, a vivid forum in which to grapple the challenges articulated by Forensic Architecture, together with the question of what can constitute non-fascist living, or how we can make life conducing to modelling a world without fascism. Forensic Architecture, which is comprised of artists, scientists, lawyers, coders, of course architects and filmmakers, among many others, use aesthetic techniques to invert the forensic gaze. In their collaboration with many different players, from human rights organizations and citizen-led initiatives, they endeavor to make sense of often surreptitious traces of crime, the gritty, pixelated sources of data, as well as witness testimonies and data that is beyond human faculty, data that eludes the pixel and is therefore on the cusp of what can be perceived. Forensic Architecture works to make this scattered heterogeneity of data tangible, turning it into a hypersensitized assembly of evidence that can attest to the human and environmental atrocities which they, and often with courageous perseverance, investigate. In their investigations and the becoming public of their investigations, in forums such as the space here at Buck, Forensic Architecture seeks to establish verification in a world where the very possibility of establishing a common perception is violated. What we are witnessing with the resurfacing of fascisms across the globe is a vicious form of propaganda and politics that pursues not only a violent destruction of facts, but also cancels out the very means and capacity to arrive at truth production. In his lecture 2 weeks ago, which opened this exhibition and public program, the director of Forensic Architecture, A.L. Weissman, spoke about verification not as a static noun, veritas, but as a verb, as a process of verification. He said, and I quote, "Verification arises through the meshing of perspectives. It is not a perspectival view of a single expert whose authority is there to render valid particular facts, but through an intense meshing of multiple perspectives that would otherwise seem incompatible." So this entangled process of verification involves calling into being what Weissman calls an unlikely common between communities and institutions of different natures, scientific, political, juridical, and cultural, to create a common ground capable of qualifying evidence against false narratives, against the attack on the very capacity to collectively perceive truth. In this unlikely common, Buck is a willing and perhaps not a novice protagonist. A willful entanglement between art, activism, and knowledge production forms the very base of Buck's institutional practice. Buck has not been shy to the challenges that come with sketching the contours of a diagram between art, politics, and discourse. It is precisely for this reason that the collaboration with forensic architecture is crucial to further navigate what an ethics of entanglement between different practices and archives of knowledge could mean, where the space of art is reoriented into a space of making visible and discussing the complexity of evidence that would otherwise not be possible in the confines of a lab or a courtroom. So in taking seriously this entanglement, we must consider the exhibition and public program not as neatly distinct from each other, but as intimately intertwined. The public program has been convened and jointly conceptualized with Amsterdam-based architectural theorist Nick Axel. And Nick has previously worked with forensic architecture as a researcher on several of their cases. So he straddles a helpful inside and outside vantage on their practice. This public program, as the 7th iteration of propositions, expands upon the notion of forensic justice by creating a space for dialogue and exchange between concrete cases examined by forensic architecture and other-going political struggles in, namely, the Netherlands, Turkey, and the Philippines. The public program thus necessarily activates and expands the exhibition as a living constellation which reclaims the practice of learning and research as a public practice. Nick will be moderating the sessions and he will talk more about the crux of the program. But just by way of a quick intro to today's session, just to say that we'll be delving into the methodology of what forensic architecture calls geosyncing, which concerns locating and coordinating evidence such as witness testimonies, photo, video, and satellite imagery in space and time. Architect and researcher and project coordinator at Forensic Architecture, Stefan Laxness, will present the Ayotzinapa case, an investigation into the disappearance of 43 students in Iguala, Mexico in 2014. And Gamze Hisle and Özlem Dingel of Wietske Maas, which translates as Truth, Justice, Memory Center in Istanbul, discuss their recent investigations into human rights violations in southeastern Turkey. Gamze is the director of the Memory Studies program at Wietske Maas, and Özlem is a lawyer specializing in public law, notably human rights. On a housekeeping note, we will be filming this session, and it will be made available on the Buck website. However, it's important to note that Gamze and Özlem's presentation will consist of material that is yet to be presented. It will be presented at the European Court of Human Rights in mid-November. And precisely because the material has not yet been presented in court, there should be no circulation of the materials. So we kindly ask you to refrain from making any recording, be it photo, video, or audio, during their presentation. So finally, before giving the floor to Nick, I'd like to finish with a few thank yous. Thank you to all my colleagues at Buck, especially Hida, who is always calmly and adeptly leading production, Inna for logistical organization, Steffi for non-stop commitment to communicating our news out into the world, and needless to say, to Nick and Maria for the hugely inspirited conversations in the lead-up and preparation for the public program. And lastly, but not least, to our speakers tonight, Stefan, Gamze, and Özlem, for your presence here in Utrecht and readiness to share what have no doubt been at times demanding experiences. I'm looking forward to tonight's exchange and to forging this unlikely common. Thank you.